Order. Order. Tim Farron to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your guidance this afternoon, and a real honour and privilege to be able to secure this debate on regulation and financial stability of water companies, a matter of enormous importance to my constituents in Westminster and Lonsdale, but quite clearly to many other people as well around the room and beyond. I wonder if, in the aftermath of the 2019 general election, many pundits or politicians would have been able to predict that by the 2024 election, water quality would be one of the top 3 doorstep issues, and to be subject to discussion in this place and in the main Commons chamber within an hour or two of each other, and indeed in the same week in the other place. But that's exactly what has happened, and there are a number of reasons, Mr Pritchard, why I think that has occurred. First, leaving the EU meant that we needed to introduce our own legislation to replace what went before. And in doing so, people, including MPs, looked under the bonnet, so to speak, for the first time and were horrified about what they saw there, about what had been long permitted in terms of sewage outflows into our rivers, lakes and coastal areas. Second, the last government failed to take effective action to limit those outflows, allowing excessive dividends and bonuses on the one hand and inadequate infrastructure investment on the other. Third, the situation is objectively getting worse. Climate change, higher rainfall, inadequate regulation and failure to invest in infrastructure renewal means that in 2023 we saw a 54% increase in sewage spills compared just to the year before. And maybe finally, but fourthly and just as importantly, this issue has emerged because community campaigners across the country have resolved that they will not accept this appalling situation and have led the way in holding water companies, regulators and government to account. Organisations such as those in our communities in Westmorland, the Clean Up the River Kent Group, Save Windermere and the Eden Rivers Trust, and many more around my communities and across the whole of the UK, have engaged in citizen science, heightened awareness and galvanised public opinion. The Liberal Democrats have made this a priority too. Water is so important to us that my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston and Surbiton, spent most of the general election campaigning about it, and indeed spending quite a lot of it in it. Having led my party through a previous general election, I know exactly how it feels to spend your campaign in deep water, and even on occasions up to one's neck in poop. I also have the immense privilege to serve Westmorland and Lonsdale and to be the MP for, amongst others, Windermere, Ullswater, Coniston Water, Haweswater, Rydal Water, Grasmere, Brothers Water, the River Kent, the River Eden, the River Lune, many others, and much of Morecambe Bay too. So for us, water is deeply personal, Mr Pritchard. It is precious to our biodiversity, to our heritage and to our tourism economy. Failure to tackle this issue rightly raises passions, but I also want to say that the fault here is in the system. We have a model of financing the industry and a regulatory framework that are simply not fit for purpose. Yet I do not want to demonise the people who work for water companies. Good, competent and decent people work for United Utilities in my community and all across the rest of the country for other companies, especially on the ground and indeed underground in our communities, and the same applies to those who work for the Environment Agency and for Ofwat. Good, hard-working professional people working within a system that is very, very badly broken. And that broken system has an appalling impact in our communities, of the lakes and dales of Westmorland. Just a few figures to demonstrate this for you, courtesy of the Rivers Trust. Just last year in Appleby, combined sewer outflows into the River Eden saw 46 spills. At Kirby Stephen on the River Eden, there were 135 spills. At Staveley on the River Cant, there were 283 spills. At T-Bay on the River Lune, there were 124 spills. And one second, at Greystoke on the River North Petrel, there were 146 spills. I could go on, but I'll let my friend intervene.
I thank the Honourable for giving way. Thank you, Mr Pritchard. And I congratulate my Honourable friend for his excellent speech. But data from Thames Water shows that Glastonbury and Somerton was the 16th worst constituency in England and Wales for sewage overflows. So does my Honourable friend agree with me that the Commission should consider establishing pollution baselines and reduction targets?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend and thank you for intervention. And it reminds us that of the 464,000 plus spills that took place in 2023, most of them were legal and permitted, and most of them should not have been. And we juxtapose this failure with the reality of money leaking out of the sector in the form of dividends and bonuses. Since privatisation, £78 billion has been paid out in dividends, and in the last 4 years we saw £62 million paid out to company executives in bonuses. Despite that, yes, happy to give way.
I thank the right honourable member for giving way, and he has a very beautiful constituency in the Lake District and has campaigned strongly on this issue. Would he therefore welcome this government's commitment to cleaning up the water industry, calling in the water bosses within the first week of a Labour government to say that investment must be ring-fenced for infrastructure, not to go on bonuses, and will he be supporting the Water Special Measures Bill?
So, first of all, I am merely honourable, but it's very kind of her. And secondly, and happily so, by the way. But secondly, yeah, and many of the proposals in the bill we welcome. We've already put many amendments down in the House of Lords because we think it's a step in the right direction, but there's a lot more that could be done, and I'll make more of that in a moment, perhaps. But it is just worth saying, when we're talking about bonuses, that 54% increase in spills between 22 and 23, and it didn't rain 54% more in 23 than in 22. There is no justification for this, and yet the bonuses happen. I've never worked in an industry, Mr Pritchard, where bonuses were in any way the norm, but my understanding is they're paid for success, not as a commiseration for statistically proven and repeated failure. So it's easy to be angry about all this. I am, and maybe it's essential to be so, but it's just as important to seek to be constructive and to seek solutions. And the depth and seriousness and complexity of this crisis means that the only answers that will work need to be radical and ambitious. So today's announcement of the Water Commission, which will consider these things, is welcome, but also a little frustrating. Do we really need to spend the best part of a year stroking our chins and pondering when what is needed is radical action right away? Most of us, with respect, pretty much predicted the likelihood of a Labour government 2 years ago. Did the victory strike them as a surprise? Why were they not ready with a plan to deliver much sooner than this? And so I have a similar view, as I've just suggested, about the water bill. It contains many, many positives, like, criminal liability for CEOs responsible for severe environmental failure, but as a piece, it doesn't amount to radical structural transformation that I think is so obviously needed. The British people rightly believe that they voted for a plan far more ambitious than this to be urgently delivered. Indeed, those who voted Liberal Democrat absolutely did vote for that, and so we're determined to keep our word, to fight for that action. And it seems obvious how regulation could be made better. Water industry regulation is fragmented. Environmental regulation done by the EA, business regulation done by Ofwat, and that just doesn't work. I'll go there and then there. Yeah, come on.
Yes. Thank the honourable member for giving way. Thank you, Mr Pritchard. To your point about the need for a regulator with teeth, West Dorset saw 45,000 hours of sewage released into our rivers and beaches last year. The River Lim last year was declared ecologically dead. I wonder if the honourable member has a view on whether or not the regulator should be able to impose fines on the water companies that reflect the damage that they are doing to our natural environment.
I completely agree, and I will answer that after I've given way over there.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Would you agree that the conflicting regulatory directives which sit across all of the different agencies that you've just referred to are part of the problem and should be urgently addressed, not necessarily waiting for this long-awaited review?
Thank you to for both interventions. First, yes, I agree. One of the problems is that Ofwat has fined, I think, 3 or maybe 4 water companies in the last year or so, to the tune of about £170 million, and has collected precisely £0 and 0 pence of those fines. And absolutely, the issue about regulators with conflicting responsibilities and rules is part of the problem. Having 2 inadequately resourced regulators with inadequate powers being played off against each other by a water industry that is far better resourced and able to run rings around very good people but very harassed people whose job it was to hold them to account. So the Liberal Democrats propose a unified and much more powerful regulator, the Clean Water Authority. That new authority would end the practice of monitoring being done by the water companies themselves, setting and marking their own homework. So let's put that right. Water companies should be charged the full cost of monitoring, but the monitoring itself should be carried out by an independent regulator so that we can be sure we're seeing the whole picture. Now, successive Conservative ministers committed to changing this, but none of them actually did so. So would the minister today commit the new government to making that necessary change? Happy to give way.
Thank you very much to my old friend, and thank you, Mr Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair. My constituents in Bicester and Woodstock are deeply concerned that Thames Water want to hike their prices by over 50% over the next 5 years. Just a month ago, I stood in the front rooms of constituents whose rooms had been flooded with sewage because of the backing up of foul water drainage. Would my honourable friend agree that the regulator which he proposes and which the Liberal Democrats support should insist and compel water companies to put performance before profit in their operations?
Absolutely. At the heart of our community benefit model, which will be governed by a Clean Water Authority, that is exactly what would be the case, and profit would not be the overriding motive, and indeed having the right people on board, including environmental campaigners in each of the areas we're talking about, would mean that we kept those water companies honest and preventing the outrageous things that my honourable friend has spoken about. The issue about the lack of reliability of data is key, because it leaves us suspicious that the scandal could actually be even worse than we think it is. The BBC reported just last week that between 21 and 23, United Utilities illegally dumped sewage into Windermere for 165 hours, of which 118 hours were not reported to the Environment Agency. Now, according to Environment Agency figures, United Utilities was the best performing water authority in England in 2022, and as a reward, they were allowed to raise 5.1 million extra by increasing bills. But as we've now seen from last week's revelations, United Utilities did not report hours and hours of illegal spills, decisions being made on the basis of inaccurate information. So when water companies mark their own homework, there are consequences. Indeed, there are deep consequences for my communities in Westland. 7 million people visit Windermere every year alongside the 20 million who go to the lakes as a whole. Now, I will state, for the record, Mr Pritchard, that I happily swim in Windermere. I have confidence in its safety in most places and at most times. But on behalf of our local community, and on behalf of our local hospitality and tourism businesses especially, I am deeply angry that the failure of the water company and their regulators to identify and to solve these problems is beginning to not only damage our environment, but doing damage too to the precious brand of the Lake District. That is why we need action that is urgent, comprehensive, tangible and ambitious. And it's why I'm also very, very grateful to my noble friend, the Baroness Bakewell, who has submitted a Liberal Democrat amendment to the Water Bill in the Lords to create special status with special protections for Windermere. I happily will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We are a river community in Eastern Walton. The Thames borders our constituency, and the River Mole, which is a chalk stream, runs through it. The River Mole is one of the most polluted rivers in the country, and a quarter of the sewage poured into it is done from my constituency in Esher. What this amounts to is failure. It is a failure that impacts our health, it impacts our environment, and it impacts our democracy. Why our democracy? Because it means the public believes that our government turns a blind eye to this outrage and to the ransacking of our public utility. It therefore neither represents them or serves their interests. Would my honourable friend therefore agree that this must not be allowed to happen again, but also that we, and particularly the new government, must deliver clean rivers and get this right?
I very much agree with my honourable friend, and I think regulation is the key to this. And Wales Water is not for profit. Scottish Water is publicly owned. And yet they both still face major problems with sewage discharges. So as my honourable friend is getting at, they provided with evidence that while ownership and finances matter, effective regulation is the key. And at present, we simply do not have it. I would happily give way. Yeah.
Labour for giving way. Would he agree that as well as regulation, commissions, all the initiative that his party is proposing, there's a massive breakdown of trust within this industry? I spoke to one of the major investors in Thames Water, and I asked when was the last time regulator, government, the companies, investors were in a room together, and it had never happened. So amongst all of these initiatives, would he agree that getting people together to talk about their different equities, their different priorities, and how they deliver for the consumer is also key to this debate?
Yes, I would agree with him. I think that But I also think there's an urgency that is needed that many people who own water companies don't themselves demonstrate, which is why the government needs to lead. But I do think it's right that we get people together to make things significantly better. Over the last 33 years, for every pound that water companies have spent on infrastructure and doing their job, 80 pence has drained away through financing debt and paying dividends. That is an appalling waste of bill payers' money and of water company assets. The separation of operating companies from parent companies, where the regulated operating company racks up huge debts to allow the unregulated parent company to pay huge dividends, has been a disgraceful scam. Now, my honourable friend from Witney will, I'm sure, say more about how this model has done such damage to the customers of Thames Water, but suffice for me to say that this model of ownership must cease, and for the regulators to stand idly by while this has happened is unacceptable, and for them not to step in as similar asset stripping begins in other water companies is an abysmal dereliction of duty by regulator and by government. So what is to be done? Well, I just want our waterways to work, Mr Pritchard, to be clean and safe. I'm not convinced, as I've said, that renationalisation would be a good use of money, public money. It could mean putting taxpayers' money into the pockets of those who've already made so much money out of them without a single extra penny going into improving infrastructure. We instead propose a radical move away from the current model, that water companies should be community benefit corporations, ensuring that all revenue goes into keeping environmental standards higher and solving the long-term problems of our networks. Given that 45% of all water company expenditure has gone on debt and financing and on dividends, then this kind of ownership and governance reform should mean that there is more money available for infrastructure renewal. My constituents, I'll give away one final time because I'm running out of time.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would he congratulate the Friends of French Weir in Taunton for helping to get bathing water status for the River Tone? And is it not a scandal that after £4.25 billion was paid by Wessex Water on dividends, the situation may now come about where bathing water status is removed because the Environment Agency and the water company won't have enough money to invest in improving river quality over the next few years?
I absolutely do want to endorse the work of the campaigners in his community. Likewise, those on the banks of Coniston Water have done the same in our area, lifting the bar for and the standards that are then under the current regulatory framework, inadequate though that is. Well, look, I want to bring my remarks to a close, but I want to just say it's clear that Thames Water has more than met the threshold to be taken into special administration, more I suspect later. But for the other water companies, the current regulatory framework seems to leave them immune, despite repeated failure to meet basic obligations to prevent sewage being dumped in our lakes, rivers and coastal areas, and even on the streets of many of the villages in my communities. The current rules mean that to remove the licence to operate from the other companies would mean the regulator serving a 25-year notice. 25 years. So I'm very grateful to my noble friend, my other noble friend, the Earl Russell, for proposing a Liberal Democrat amendment to in the Lords that would take that ludicrous 25-year notice period down to a notice of just 6 months for environmental failure. I hope the government will accept that amendment. If not, I will be submitting it in the Commons. So our vision is that the new, more powerful Clean Water Authority would have the power to strip all water companies of their licence to operate within 6 months and then migrate them to the community benefit model. Because we believe that it is time for the British people to get a water system that is clean, where they can get what they paid for, where their hard-earned money is not siphoned off by overseas merchant banks, where their precious waterways are infected with untreated sewage outrageously. So I represent, I would argue, the most beautiful part of England. One of the reasons it is beautiful is because it is also the wettest bit of England. And the failure of governments of different kinds and the regulators and water companies to tackle storm overflows was always going to hit hardest in the places with the most storms. That's why we are frustrated that a Conservative government that denied the problem existed seems to have been replaced by a government who have acknowledged the problem but have now announced that they are going to ponder it very hard for a bit. And the problem seems to me very obvious, and therefore so are the solutions. So I call upon the government to act ambitiously, comprehensively, and to do it now, without delay. Thank you.
Question is that this House has considered the regulation and financial stability of water companies. Just a few housekeeping points, members can be seated. It will have an informal 3-minute rule, and then perhaps if colleagues are intervening a lot and we're running out of time, it may have to go to a formal ruling from the chair, which then will mean any interventions are adding a minute to that, those particular speakers. Can I just say that if colleagues are coming into this chamber, into this debate or any other debate, they really should wait for the end of at least the first speaker having intervened before leaving. So the person left is not here to hear that ruling, but just as a learning, gentle reminder for perhaps some of our other colleagues. Also, when members speak, they should really remain in the chamber until they've heard 2 other speakers before leaving. And the final observation from this debate today is if colleagues come in order, forgive me, but you may forgive me, the honourable member may want to hear this. If honourable members come in halfway through the opening speaker, they should not really then expect to intervene, having not heard at least the introduction and some of the preamble to the substantive points. I hope that's helpful, and I only share it from a point of weakness, having made all of these mistakes and many more myself over many years. So thank you so much. So we'll have an informal limit now of 3 minutes to start. Thank you. Graham Morris.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard, for calling me to speak in this debate, and it's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, for securing this important debate. No doubt about it, my honourable friend's constituency is blessed with some of the most stunning natural beauty in the world, never mind in the country, the fells and the woodlands in the Lake District, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The illegal sewage dumping at Windermere by United Utilities doesn't just shame our nation, it should be considered an ecological crime, and those responsible must be held accountable and face the full force of the law. While the Lake District is world-renowned, I'm equally proud to represent a hidden gem, the Durham Heritage Coast, or to be precise, the East Durham Heritage Coast. Our magnificent magnesium limestone cliffs offer spectacular views of the North Sea, and in the summer the coastal grasslands are alive with rare wildflowers, creating a habitat for the Durham brown Argus butterfly and other wildlife. This coastline, once scarred by industrial waste from coal, has been reclaimed by nature. Yet now it faces a new threat: sewage. Sewage overflows, far from being a rare event, have become routine in the water industry. In 2023, Northumbrian Water discharged raw sewage for over 28,000 hours in 46,492 incidents, including into the bathing waters of Seaham and Crimdon in my constituency. What compounds this environmental disaster is the economic abuse by water companies. Since privatisation in 1989, companies like Northumbrian Water have neglected infrastructure while accumulating staggering debts to pay out dividends.
On that point, will my honourable friend give way?
I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He mentioned his local water company. People in Leeds and Yorkshire feel ripped off when Yorkshire Water has just announced its intention to increase prices by 35% by 2030. It's no wonder that people feel ripped off, and would my honourable friend agree that this is a compelling reason why the water companies should be brought into public ownership, so they can put a public service and the public good and environmental good ahead of the accumulation of profits for shareholders?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and indeed Northumbrian Water is not alone. Across the industry, financial mismanagement has gone hand in hand with environmental failure. Northumbrian Water alone has built up £3.5 billion in debt, while paying out £4.1 billion in dividends to shareholders. This means that 19% of consumer bills in my region goes towards servicing debt. Now, I do welcome the government's Water Special Measures Bill, its provisions to block bonus payments for executives, require annual pollution reduction plans, and improved transparency on sewage discharges. These are all crucial. The tougher penalties, including the threat of imprisonment for those impeding investigations, are necessary steps. But while we're moving in the right direction, I fear this won't be enough to address the scale of the problem. Yes, the bill strengthens regulation, and it is certainly more robust than anything proposed by the opposition now or when in government. But will it solve the underlying issues? I suspect the answer to that one is no. We can't ignore the fact the public are already paying the price for this industry's failure. We pay through higher bills, through polluted waters, and through an industry debt that now exceeds £60 billion. When this sector finally collapses under the weight of its own excesses, it will be the taxpayer, Mr Pritchard, who is left to pick up the pieces. So personally, I support the public ownership proposals. I think the costs are vastly exaggerated in the context of the scale of the challenge and the liability, but we must take steps now to fix the debt, pollution and infrastructure crisis in the water industry. So we need to go further than is being proposed. Blocking executive bonuses is not enough, and without measures, determined measures, the consequences will be higher bills for consumers, more money lost to debt repayment, in an industry that continues to prioritise profit over public good.
Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship of this debate this afternoon. Water is fundamentally a human right, and everyone needs water at some point. Everybody has to use water, and the water companies, which are now all in private ownership, have a responsibility not just to supply water, but also jointly with the Environment Agency. It's about river basin management, it's about flooding, and it's about so many other things. And the private ownership of water since 1989 has resulted in £78 billion paid out in dividends, mostly to foreign-owned companies, many of whom do not pay tax in this country. It's resulted in a £60 billion debt collectively by all of those countries, and £9.1 million has been paid out to chief executives in utterly excessive salaries. So the argument for privatisation was that there would be more investment, the water would be cheaper, and the service would be more efficient. Well, it's really worked out well on that, hasn't it? With massive levels of sewage discharge into rivers and sea, lower quality water levels all over, and less investment in many, many areas. I represent... yes, of course, yes.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard. Will the honourable gentleman agree with me that the 285,000 people who've signed the petition that I helped to present to Downing Street a couple of years ago about renationalisation, particularly those constituents in Whitstable, in my beautiful coastal town, that have been badly let down by Southern Water on a daily basis?
I thank the member for that intervention. An absolutely excellent initiative that she put forward at that time, calling for public ownership of the water industry, and I'll conclude my short remarks with the question of public ownership in a couple of minutes' time. The issue I now want to refer to is Thames Water, which covers my constituency, much of London and the South East. It is probably one of the biggest water companies. It's the most indebted, it's the most inefficient, and it's the one that is interesting to know how it actually survives as a company. And when even the Financial Times 2 years ago was calling for public ownership of the water industry and said it's a norm around the world, I'm sure it is Thames that they had in mind. Thames Water has racked up on its own £14 billion of debt. In 1989, on privatisation, its debt was zero. They paid out £2.7 billion in dividends and £37 million in what they euphemistically call internal dividends to their parent companies. And the company could require as much as £10 billion to get its infrastructure up to regulatory standards. And that will then be, of course, compounded by the interest payments on this massive debt pile they've got. Well, my constituents suffer flooding. my constituents suffer endless traffic disruption because of the lack of maintenance over many, many years, and so there has to be an endless replacement of short sections of pipe work because there hasn't been a proper planned investment programme for it. So my call, Mr. Chair, is quite simply this, that the government's regulatory regime, yes, I'm sure it would be better than what we have at the present time, and it's good that the Secretary of State acknowledges the issues facing the water companies and facing all of us as consumers around the country. But I simply say this, that we're once more into a debate between a regulator who this morning was claiming they couldn't invest because of the water industry claiming they couldn't invest because of the regulatory framework. I think we should go back to the issue of public ownership. The figures given by the Secretary of State today, I've no idea where they came from. Perhaps he can explain that. The reality is, on public ownership, Parliament would decide what the share value is. Parliament would decide what the compensation paid would be, which would have to take into account the inefficiency and the waste of the companies, and that they would be compensated with government bonds at fixed rate of interest. And it would give us public ownership and control. I don't want an old-style nationalisation. I want community nationalisation. I'll finish on this point, where local authorities, where the workers in the industry, where local communities and the Environment Agency are jointly involved in how the water companies could perform. A lot better than distant shareholders raking in massive profits from our water supply.
Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. Speak under your chairship. May I also thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for securing this debate genuinely. But the previous Conservative government weakened water regulation, let our rivers fill with toxic pollution and allowed companies to pay themselves huge bonuses, all while household bills soared. Shameful. I know that many constituents in York Outer are disgusted by this. We've got the beautiful River Foss and Ouse that flow through my constituency. To see both of them degraded is not only unforgivable, but it's bewildering to watch. The lack of regulation and mismanagement by the previous Conservative government has created a plethora of issues. I've had constituents writing in since being elected about the stench of sewage seeping into Rawcliffe, water pump failures near Haxby, and flood alleviation concerns in Fulford. Although the Tories are no longer in power, these issues aren't water under a bridge. They still need to be fixed. And I think that's why today's statement from the Secretary of State on the Independent Water Commission is a great first step. And I'm also delighted my honourable friend, the Minister, is tackling these issues at pace. At this early stage, my main suggestion today is that we must take lessons from other regulatory industries and regulatory failures within them when designing the future water regulation system. Now, when I was at the Bank of England, Sir John Cunliffe was highly regarded, and so I warmly encourage him to look at where there has been disjoint in financial services regulator. And I think we should move to a centralised, smart regulator. And for me, that involves looking at scrapping and replacing Ofwat. And perhaps Sir John could publish an interim view on this suggestion. So while it's great to see so many people engaged in today's debate, it's frustrating to see that we are here. It's clear to me the government is turning the tide against chronic underinvestment in our water industries. Water companies must be regulated properly, and the regulators must have the power to adequately regulate the sector. That has got to be the goal. If we can make that happen after 14 years of Tory failure, we'll soon be sailing in smooth waters. Thank you, Mr. Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for securing today's timely debate when the Secretary of State has taken to the House with a statement announcing an independent water commission. And as I stated during his statement, the promise to fundamentally transform our water industry and clean up our waterways for good is welcomed and celebrated across the House. Our lakes and rivers are national treasures, yet water company executives have been degrading these resources to protect their own profits and shareholders, while the companies themselves are drowning in debt. The water system in England is at breaking point, and water companies are not being held accountable for one of the worst environmental crises in the UK, the dumping of sewage into our rivers, lakes and coastline. My honourable friend's contribution in his opening remarks mentioned that Ofwat has fined 4 or 5 water companies into the billions in fines and have currently not collected a penny. And the damage done by these water companies is no more apparent than in Chichester Harbour, which is a site of special scientific interest. It's a national landscape and it's in an unfavourable declining condition and desperately needs ambition to protect it. The British public pays these companies not only to provide us with clean water, but also to ensure safe and clean processes for wastewater and sewage while protecting our environment. Storm overflows are supposed to be exceptional, not the norm. During my election campaign, I saw a real passion among constituents on the doorsteps for addressing the problem of water pollution and sewage dumping, and it has been a pleasure meeting with passionate environmental campaigners across the constituency, such as Friends of the Ems and the group carrying out citizen science on the River Lavant, both precious chalk streams. The UK is now lagging far behind other European countries in water quality and the safety of our waterways, and our polluted rivers and lakes are becoming an anomaly in Europe. At the time of privatisation, water companies were debt-free. However, over the last 35 years, as inflation and interest rates have risen, the debt burden on UK water companies, including Southern Water, that serves my constituency of Chichester, has grown significantly, particularly because much of this debt is linked to the retail price index. Borrowings across the sector now total around 68 million, and yet during the same period, water companies have paid at least 78 billion in dividends to shareholders. An investor presentation posted on Southern Water's website earlier this month revealed that the company is seeking to borrow up to 4 billion from investors to offset 3.8 billion in debt over the next 5 years. In addition, the company has proposed a staggering 73% increase in household bills over the same period. To mitigate their debt, Southern Water is planning a large-scale investment in the Havant Thicket Reservoir, which would introduce recycled wastewater into a spring-fed drinking water supply through a process called reverse osmosis. This process has never been used for drinking water in the UK before and is typically found in severely water-stressed, landlocked countries. And although the South East has been officially designated as water-stressed, and we need to see reform coming forward to reduce abstraction on rivers such as the Ems, smaller, more environmentally sustainable solutions are available but are just not being explored because they cannot be offset against the company's debt. Of course, I'll give way.
Thank you, Chair. On that note about the water stress levels in Southern Water, we obviously share the same water provider between our constituencies, and it's worth acknowledging that a fifth of water is lost to leaks. And we've just heard that Southern Water are in discussions with a company in Norway to provide water tanked over here from Norwegian fjords to deal with the potential droughts and water shortages that will be coming up in the future. That is an absolute failure to plan and a failure to invest in infrastructure and a failure to provide reservoirs like the one we're speaking about over a long period of time, and it is clearly a failure of regulation as well.
Thank you to my honourable friend for his intervention, and I absolutely agree with you that we should be looking at investing in fixing the infrastructure that we have here rather than shipping over large quantities of water, which I'm sure is not financially stable. A company operating in this manner outside of the water industry would not be able to get away with it. So why can Southern Water and other water companies? This development at the Havant Thicket would not only affect my constituency of Chichester, but 18 constituencies across the south of England. Further, it is going to create a national blueprint for all water companies. And the project will cost a staggering £1.2 billion, and yet there's no comparable investment in wastewater management, which is sorely needed. To be clear, I am not opposed to new reservoirs, and Portsmouth Water are bringing forward the first reservoir that this country has delivered in 30 years. But while public confidence in water companies and the methodology of investment is at an all-time low, it's hard to have faith that they will deliver this project without impacting residents' water bills in the future. Southern Water's plan to invest in a huge experimental project as a way to offset their debt is not a sustainable financial model. Few scandals illustrate the failure of the previous government as clearly as the state of our rivers and seas. With 3.6 million hours of sewage dumping recorded last year, the system is rigged, and it's time to transform this irresponsible industry into an accountable service that truly delivers for the public and the environment. Thank you.
Okay. Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Pitcher, for calling me to speak in this debate. I just want to touch slightly. We've talked about how disgusting it is and what a public health issue it is to have sewage it's pouring into our rivers and other pollution. But I just want to touch on the ecological damage. In Winchester, we have a chalk stream, the River Itchen, going right through the heart of the city. And it's, chalk streams are very rare. There's less than 210 of them in the entire world. 85% of them are in southern England. And many of them are designated as sites of special scientific interest because the ecology, the biodiversity is unique. And it's worth, members might find this interesting, I found this out recently, that the type of Atlantic salmon that we find in southern chalk streams are genetically distinct from the Atlantic salmon we see in the rest of the world. And so it's worth noting that these streams have taken millions of years to form on this planet, and they can be destroyed by just a few decades of companies acting either breaking the law or working within the law, but because they have such a lack of regulation, they're causing this huge amount of environmental damage. And it's bad for public health, it's bad for consumers, it's bad for the prices, but it's also really bad for the environment. And what's frustrating in my constituency is that we're aware that Southern Water is 82% owned by an Australian investment firm. And so it's quite clear they have been prioritising, profit over pollution. It's that simple. And I really think that it's... yeah, sure.
Member for giving way. Is he aware that the problem is also exacerbated by over-abstraction upstream, particularly in chalk streams, where obviously to environmentally survive, they have to have water flowing through them throughout the year. Many chalk streams are actually completely dry for some months of the summer, and obviously that destroys all fish and all ecological sustainability.
The Honourable Member makes a very important point that it's not simply pollution that damages chalk streams, but the over-extraction of these environments is horrendously damaging. I suppose one thing that we've been calling for a long time as Liberal Democrats is having reforming water companies so that on their boards they have environmental experts to ensure they have to meet their minimum environmental standards before they're allowed to make any profits. And that's something we've been calling for a long time. And I think putting sort of social good and environmental good at the heart of what they're doing is absolutely necessary to make sure that we don't, in 30 years' time, talk about how we're still struggling with pollution, with leaks, with lack of investment. So thank you for calling me to speak in this debate, but it is certainly a subject that I think that my constituents and probably everyone's constituents have one of their very top priorities is protecting our natural environment.
Hi, Jones.
It's a pleasure to be under your chairmanship, Mr. Pritchard, and I congratulate my honourable friend for getting this debate. My constituency of Wokingham contains the Thames, the Loddon, the Embrook and the Ashridge stream. Rivers of varying size but equal beauty. The basic role of a government is to keep its citizens safe, healthy and to protect the environment for future generations. And yet the previous government's deference for corporate greed over our waterways will remain a stain on their legacy for a long time. The Rivers Trust put it clearly in their research. No single stretch of river in Wokingham is in good overall health. A real scandal. The Conservatives have utterly failed by being unable to grip the issue and allowing this scandal to persist, providing no accountability or scrutiny to Ofwat, a regulator that simply hasn't held the worst polluters to account. Meanwhile, as my honourable friend says, they have paid out dividends of £78 billion. £78 billion of dividends, yet our rivers are in the worst state that they've been in for many, many years. I welcome the announcement earlier today regarding a review of water companies, but would remind the Minister that voters in Wokingham and across the country voted for change on the 4th of July, and that the review needs to reflect this. It can't be business as usual for water companies, and my constituents and many others across the country won't accept massively increased bills to bail out water companies who are paying massive dividends to their shareholders.
Yeah, yeah. Call Adrian Ramsey, and then I'll call Sarah Green so people can prepare a little. Thank you. Adrian Ramsey. Sarah Green, then, you're in.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And may I begin by thanking my honourable friend for securing this debate on something I know matters to a great many of my own constituents in Chesham and Amersham. The appalling examples of sewage-filled floodwater that have blighted lives in my constituency are part of a much bigger picture, a water industry that isn't held to account by a regulatory system that isn't fit for purpose. So I welcome the announcement of the Independent Water Commission today. As a report published last year by Surfers Against Sewage states, part of the problem is the severe budget cuts that regulators have experienced that has meant even reported pollution events go uninvestigated and unpunished. Indeed, in 2022, the Environment Agency instructed its staff to ignore reports of low-impact pollution events as it did not have sufficient resources to investigate them. To the extent that this is the case, we get the environment we pay for. But this is only part of the problem. A report published by the previous government in May this year is clear that regulators must avoid drifting into unnecessary risk aversion. Internal culture should challenge excessive risk aversion, not promote it. Mr. Pritchard, one former employee of the Environment Agency described to me how the agency can be seen by some of those it regulates as a toothless tiger. I'd like to suggest to the Minister that fixing the regulatory framework isn't the only area worth looking at. There's also a need to make sure we aren't creating more problems in the future when it comes to our sewerage system. At present, our water companies are not statutory consultees on planning applications. Instead of asking if the existing sewerage infrastructure can support new developments, the right to connect means the water companies are required to make it work after the fact. This is surely nonsensical and something the government can address as part of the work it's currently doing on the National Planning Policy Framework. I'd like to close, Mr. Pritchard, with a thank you to the many campaigners in Chesham and Amersham who've worked tirelessly on this issue. That includes the River Chess Association, the Chiltern Society, Misbourne River Action and others. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the parish councils locally who have found themselves at the forefront of these issues, becoming citizen scientists and experts in a way they never expected. I've been so impressed by the dedication and diligence shown by them to do the best to help their residents. But they are volunteers committed to their environment and their communities. They shouldn't be responsible for holding the water industry to account. That's what our regulators are for. Thank you.
If they do wish to speak to Bob, as I see three other speakers are bobbing, thank you very much indeed. Ollie Glover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Westminster and Lonsdale, for securing this critically important debate. In my Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage, over 90% of water infrastructure is managed by Thames Water, a de facto monopoly. The constituency impacts of the current arrangements are stark. In South Oxfordshire, sewage from storm overflows into water bodies exceeded 11,000 hours in 2023 during 810 spills. Recently, in East Hannay and Didcot, overwhelmed sewage pumps have led to flooding, including with contaminated water. The worst performer in the country for leaks was Thames Water, which leaked 570.4 megalitres a day last year, or more than 200 billion litres in total, equivalent to just under a quarter of its entire water supply. And analysts estimate that Thames Water's current debt amounts to about 80% of the value of its business, making it the most heavily indebted of England and Wales water companies. And at the same time, Thames Water has said its bills need to rise by 59% between 2025 and 2030, or else it won't be able to recover from its financial crisis. It's in this context that proposals for a reservoir in my constituency are causing concern to local residents. Whilst many are sceptical of the case for the reservoir, even if we put that to one side, there is a concern about whether Thames Water can be trusted to competently programme, manage and deliver the second largest reservoir in the country and what would be one of the largest civil engineering projects in the land.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way?
I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. Since 2020, £41 million of executive bonuses have been paid out to companies like Thames Water, and that's a disgrace that the Conservatives allow happen. Does the Honourable Gentleman agree with me that change is needed to stop companies like Thames Water paying such ridiculous bonuses when their house is clearly not in order?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and he's anticipated the very next line of my remarks, which is, it is time for a change, on the issue of bonuses and many other aspects of the current working of the water industry. I'm pleased to see the Government initiating an independent review of the water sector today, including the question of regulation. But I hope they will consider some bold Liberal Democrat ideas, such as setting legally binding targets to prevent sewage dumping into bathing waters and highly sensitive nature sites by 2030, giving local environmental groups a place on water companies' boards, and introducing a single social tariff for water bills to help eliminate water poverty during the course of this and future parliaments. Thank you, Mr Pritchard, for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response.
Well, Savage.
Thank you, Mr Pritchard. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Clean water is a fundamental human right, yet the exploitation of our water companies at the expense of the British taxpayer is deeply offensive to me and to my constituents of the South Cotswolds. It adds insult to injury that these same companies now expect taxpayers to foot the bill for improvements they should have prioritised over CEO bonuses and shareholder dividends. As already mentioned, since privatisation, shareholders have extracted a staggering £85 billion from the water and sewerage system in England and Wales. In my constituency of the South Cotswolds, where the River Thames rises, Thames Water pumped sewage into the River Colne in Fairford for 3,391 hours in 2022, the equivalent of 4.5 months. Incidents that are meant to be exceptional happen on average over 3 times a week. Dog walkers no longer feel comfortable walking their dogs along the riverbanks after one dog jumped into the water, got sick and died 2 days later. Across the constituency, sewage is flooding into houses and gardens and schools. This is simply unacceptable. We need an ambitious, long-term, financially and environmentally responsible vision for our water industry as an essential, literally vital public good. And that vision must be oriented towards good, clean water. Back in 2013, I was campaigning for the London super sewer, paddling around under Putney Bridge, looking appalled at tampons and other solid waste coming out of an overflow under Putney Bridge. It's taken over 11 years to even open the first section of the London super sewer. The best time to fix this crisis would have been 30 years ago. But the second best time is now. I'm not letting water companies off the hook for a moment, but I would like to say that the vision must embody a holistic approach to water management. Housing developers can capture rainwater to reduce runoff. Farmers have a key role to play in keeping agricultural contaminants out of our rivers. We need action to stop forever chemicals from plastic and pharmaceuticals getting into our rivers and streams. In short, we need to stop the incessant pollution of our natural world. Water connects everything. Clean water nourishes all life, while dirty water pollutes everything it touches, from otters and kingfishers and crayfish to your pets and you. We need to put nature back at the heart of our decision-making, as called for in my Climate and Nature Bill. The Liberal Democrats propose transforming water companies into public benefit companies. No more excessive bonuses, no more prioritising shareholders over customers. We would also like to see local environmental groups have a voice on the boards of water companies. Some countries have even granted legal personhood to rivers, including the Wanganui River in New Zealand, the Atrato River in Colombia, and the Magpie River in Canada. Potentially, we could have a person representing the river itself sitting on a corporate board. The time is now to take bold steps to improve water company governance, invest in our infrastructure, and protect our precious water resources for generations to come. Mr. Pritchard, thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Chairman, a real pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I first of all thank the honourable friend and member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for keeping us, and also I think it'd be fair to start off the contribution by welcoming the Labour government's statement today in the House. Starting a step in the right direction, and we should welcome that for the objectives that it's trying to achieve. The honourable lady's in her place, so we're very glad to know that. I'm going to give a Northern Ireland perspective. The honourable lady has no responsibility for Northern Ireland, so I won't require any response from the honourable lady. But I want to make the point, because what's happened to us in Northern Ireland is very similar to what's happening to the honourable gentleman, and I want to make that comment for Hansard. But we in Northern Ireland have a very different system. The Northern Ireland Water is actually a government-owned company, whilst we have a different system on paper. In reality, we have the very same issues with a government-owned company who says that they don't have enough funding, need a massive uplift in funding to function, because it feels like measuring the funding needed to bring things up to scratch is like turning your tap on. It just seems to run forever. You're never quite sure if you can get to the end of it. So where are we in Northern Ireland at this moment in time, and why is it important that what's been identified here today in this debate is something that we unfortunately have in Northern Ireland as well? The water and sewerage network in Northern Ireland is some 1.2 billion capital investment needed, and of course that can't be achieved in the short term. We have approached government and the Minister on a different debate for a different day in relation to the Barnett consequential to ensure that we get the same funding equation as they do in Wales, as an example, and that would give us extra money to perhaps in a way identify the issues. But there is a DFI back home have indicated that some £500 million has to be found for 24-25, and that's a big target to meet. But the honourable gentleman has underlined the issues. Northern Ireland reporting a £185 million shortfall in funding. They referred to the sewer connection has meant that some 19,000 new properties. That's nearly 50% of all applications haven't been put into the main sewer system, which means that the companies, the development companies, the housing associations, the developers have to find the money to do that themselves. Now, what really annoys me, Mr. Chairman, and others have referred to it, is the large bonuses and the dividends for shareholders. I believe it to be obscene, and I believe it to be immoral, while their failures to deliver a reasonable service has to be highlighted in this debate today. So it's important that we understand the nature of this debate and how it affects us in devolved matters, but for different reasons and different accountability. News that United Utilities repeatedly dumped millions of litres of raw sewage illegally into Lake Windermere has been shocking, and yet we're not really surprised when we look at what's happening. The number of surface waters a class in Northern Ireland as having good ecological status is only 31%. It might be better in some parts of England, but it's still not good enough. I conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. I agree that we must tighten controls, but we must also try to ensure better value for money, as it's clear that the way things are in our water service throughout this great nation cannot continue much longer. And I would ask the Minister to ensure that when the Minister responds, that cognizance is there of the need to have a UK-wide solution, and including devolved nations is imperative. When you see crisis and where you develop that crisis, then it's important how we find the solutions. So we take our clean water very much for granted in the UK, but we may not be able to do so for much longer unless we give this issue the priority it deserves, and that indeed must start today in this House. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I call the opposition front benches, they'll know it's 5 minutes for Liberal Democrat opposition spokesperson and Conservative, and 10 minutes for the Minister. This debate is due to finish at 4. For those who do the maths, you'll work out that actually some people have left this debate. Some didn't speak as long as perhaps they were expected to, even though we were going to put a time limit on it. What happens is we have a list of people, then people don't turn up, then we have other people come in, and then we have people come in that aren't on the list. So basically what I'm saying, if you haven't spoken or you want to do a brief intervention, then you can do so over the next few minutes, but please keep them brief. So I think that was fair, given that I hinted that we might want to do a voluntary time limit, and this debate has been well attended today. Thank you. So, sir.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Pritchard. Thank you. I'm honoured to be under your chairmanship. Thank you also, my honourable friend for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, for letting me wrap up the speech today. And thank you all to all the speakers who spoke so well and so eloquently about all the places they represent and love. I'm the Liberal Democrat MP for Witney and also West Oxfordshire District Councillor. Our area is a ground zero for pollution. The Windrush flows through Witney, the Evenlode flows through to the north, the Shilbrook to the south, all flow into the Thames, all are repeatedly and heavily polluted. I've worked very closely with Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, one of the best advocacy groups in the country, to work with them to get to grips with this problem. And I've learnt a lot from them and from many of the other parish councils and other community groups that have worked so hard locally. And I'm very grateful to everything they've taught me. I'm going to focus here to start with on financial stability, or the lack thereof, and I'm going to focus on Thames Water, as it's the largest and the most unstable of the water companies. So first of all, some context. Thames Water has 6 holding companies, stacked one on top of the other. Some of them are offshore, some of them are onshore. The top holding company, Kemble, has 1.2 billion of operating cash flows. That's money coming in, and it has 18 billion of debt. 1.2, 18. Roughly 13 of that 18 billion is held by Class A bondholders, and you're going to hear a bit more about them. This debt is very expensive, and more than a third of all our customers' bills are just being spent on servicing the debt. A third of our customers' bills. Now, in July, S&P and Moody's cut the credit ratings of the Class A bonds to junk. That's below every single investment grade. They cut it to junk, and they took it down 2 notches below that. That action put the company in breach of its operating licence. Ofwat waved some limp celery at them and did really very, very little. And this opens up moral hazard, because it means that other water companies can do the same, and it means that other companies in regulated sectors can also do the same. On the 5th of August, the Under-Secretary of State replied to my written question stating that Thames Water's financial position remains stable. In early September, it became public that various funds, including the notorious Elliott Management, who pillaged Argentina and Peru, have bought large amounts of Class A debt at very discounted prices. On the 13th of September, the Under-Secretary of State replied to me again, stating that Thames Water remained stable. The Under-Secretary of State noted that special administration was an option if any of 3 conditions were met, with one of the conditions being, and I quote, if the company is or is likely to be unable to pay its debts. Pretty simple. 26th of September, both S&P and Moody's slashed Thames Water's Class A debt again. This time, they're already in junk, 2 notches below junk actually, a further 5 and 6 notches respectively. The word death spiral does spring to mind. A week ago, it was reported that Ofwat is meeting a creditor group representing the Class A shareholders to discuss restructuring the company's debt. The condition that the company is or is likely to be unable to pay its debt has most definitely been met. The company's cash burn is faster than previously forecast, and the company, as is, will likely run out of cash by December. The company's Class A bondholders are desperate to avoid special administration, as this would crystallise their loss and would result in much of their debt being written off. However, these creditors are now negotiating with Ofwat to inject a relatively small amount of new capital in, cram down the other debt classes, resulting in perhaps a 20 to 30% debt write-down, and flip some of their debt into equity and then sell the company on to another buyer within 12 months, making a huge profit. If the government allows this restructuring, it is effectively rescuing a group of lenders, including vulture funds, not the company. Instead of the bondholders having to write off billions of pounds of worthless debts, the government will be giving them ownership of the company to the vulture funds, which they will then flip at a profit. This route is neither sensible nor equitable, either for the company or this government or our country, and I'm afraid I believe is the lazy short-term fix, which the government can repent from at leisure over the course of the parliamentary term. No one is going to be fooled by the government claiming that in the very short term the market has fixed it, and no one should be panicked by bankers claiming Armageddon, but in reality just driving their own agenda. The special administration regime was set up for exactly this scenario. The government should make use of it and place Thames Water into special administration, allowing for an orderly restructuring and reorganisation, resulting in the sale of a clean company on the open market. This sector, and whether that goes into the nationally, mutually, private, that's up to the government, of course, but that will allow a clean company to be in place. To be investable again as a sector, we need a clear regulatory framework which is transparent and enforceable against, where companies which make bad decisions know they will have to take the consequences. This will allow investors to fund water companies' balance sheets so that they can handle the very substantial investment spend which will be required over the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for securing this really important debate. Now, as has been acknowledged by all members, the UK's waterways are the country's lifeblood, and when they're in a good state of condition, not only is it beneficial for the environment, but also public health, and crucial for biodiversity and for local communities who rely on them, not only for recreational purposes, but also for tourism. Now, the last government were determined to make a positive stance on improving water quality. But to do that, we needed to understand the situation that water companies were in. And that is why we specifically focused on increasing the monitoring of outfalls from the start, taking on a monitoring of storm overflows at 7% in 2010 under the last Labour administration to 100% of all storm overflows being monitored at the end of 2023. We also fast-tracked in March 24 £180 million of investment that had to be allocated within the last financial year by water companies, and with the expectation of 8,000 sewage spills being reduced within English waterways. And we also linked shareholder dividends to environmental performance, quadrupled water company inspections, and launched a whistle-blowing portal for water company workers to report breaches. I will give way, yeah.
Does he not feel embarrassed that it was his government that begged the Environment Agency and weakened regulators to the point where we had sewage flowing into rivers like the Tyne and the Coquet in Northumberland? And does he not feel a little bit of guilt about trumpeting his government's apparently positive record?
And I thank the member for Hexham for joining the debate. I see that he just came in right at the last minute there just to make that contribution. But no, when we were in government, we absolutely wanted to embolden the regulators with as much power as they required, which is why we linked specifically dividends to environmental performance, so that Ofwat had more power to be able to hold water companies to account. And not only that, did we increase the amount of funding that was allocated to the Environment Agency and empowered the whistleblowing portal, so that those employees within water companies, or indeed within the EA or any of the other regulators, could make their concerns known, so that we as the government, or now the incoming government, could make sure that proper progress and proper positive change was implemented to improve water quality. The financial stability of the water companies is, of course, a serious issue, and that affects not only our constituents through potential price increases, but also through performance-related issues. Sensibly, Ofwat expects water companies to maintain a level of financial headroom to manage short-term volatility and shocks to their financial structures, and meet their obligations and commitments that are set from government, but also internally as a regulator. But above all else, the consumers must be protected, and I therefore welcome the fact that Ofwat strengthened its powers to improve financial resilience. This includes stopping water companies paying dividends where financial resilience is also at risk. Now, the new government has said that cleaning up rivers, England's rivers, lakes, seas, is a priority. And to achieve this, the Special Water Measures Bill has been introduced through the House of Lords into Parliament. However, perhaps I should not have been so surprised that this is effectively reworked version of the policies that were introduced under the last government. In this bill, the government pledges to introduce new powers to block water companies' bosses' bonuses for executives who pollute our waterways, something that was announced by the last Conservative government. But these powers aren't quite, in fact, the very promises that were constantly regurgitated from the Labour Party when they were out on the door. In fact, they were telling many of their voters that, and I quote, water company bosses would simply end up in the dock if their water company had been falling foul of environmental permitting obligations. And the Water Special Measures Bill just does simply not achieve this. So what the new government has done by introducing this bill is not only frustrating campaigners, but also frustrating investors who really want to invest in this sector. Next, members of the party opposite spent many a day out on the door also promising that they were going to take swift and bold action on this. But as we have seen from today's announcement, with a new commission, a new review, a new task force being set up, that this is just simply throwing the hard decisions into the long grass and is simply kicking the can down the road. Now, I will.
Does the honourable member not welcome the government's appointment of former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, John Cunliffe, I apologise, because he had that expertise as Deputy Governor in financial stability? And does he not think that we need to look again at the whole system when it comes to financial instability of water companies that he and his colleagues left behind?
And I thank the member for York Outer for his intervention, and I absolutely welcome anything that is going to improve the water sector. Indeed, when I was Minister in the department, there were many issues that needed to be addressed, but I noticed that he commented in his speech that the Minister was working at pace, but it's simply a review that is going to take at least a year to implement. And I'd like to actually ask the Minister, as I did the Secretary of State in the House earlier, when will the positive recommendations from the review be implemented? We know that we're entering Price Review 24, which exists from 25 to 2030. But when is the industry likely to see any positive implications as a result of the commission that has been instigated today? I understand that ministers have said that this will... now, the government have also confirmed that they will work with farmers to reduce agricultural pollution. And I understand that the ministers have said that this will be through a series of proportionate and effective regulations, advice and incentives to deliver these improvements. But can the minister clarify how this will roll out? What new regulations the department is anticipating bringing in? And of course, when the agricultural budget, the farming budget, is rumoured to be slashed by at least £100 million, how are they going to be incentivising farmers through public money to do the right thing in terms of reducing runoff from fields and from their agricultural activities? And can the Minister also outline whether or not any regulatory easement will be applied to water companies going forward? Many members have raised concerns to do with Thames Water and the like, but I would like to specifically understand if the Minister or her colleagues or the Secretary of State are looking at implementing a regulatory easement, as we would not want to see on this side of the House any lowering of standards, any relaxation of environmental permits, or reduce agreed levels of investment by any water company, irrespective of their financial circumstance. To sum up, Mr Pritchard, sound management of water companies is vital if customers are to receive the high level of service they expect and moving forward in driving better environmental performance.
So before I call the Minister, I allowed, as you saw, some interventions, so allowed the front benches to speak a little bit longer, given that we have some time. So the Minister, if she wishes to take interventions, she can, but clearly doesn't have to. And just to remind the Minister that if she so chooses, she can give time at the end, just a couple of minutes, to the mover of the motion, Tim Farron. Can I just, before I call the Minister, say, forgive me to mention the Honourable Member for Hexham. It is a procedure of the House, courtesy of the House, to really be in the debate, not coming in at 65 minutes for a 90-minute debate and then making an intervention. It's not really the way to add to a debate or get the most out of it. I'm sure he'll take note of that. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's just a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale for securing this debate. And of course, I will make sure he has time at the end to sum up. And in response to the Shadow Minister, I think the government's record speaks for itself. And although he may wish to rewrite history, he can't actually change history. So if people want to look at what the government achieved, perhaps they just need to look at a storm overflow pipe, or perhaps the levels of pollution that are in every single river, lakes and seas. Because the public outrage and outcry on this issue is felt by everybody, and is certainly felt by this government. The levels of pollution in our iconic lakes, like Windermere, in our beautiful chalk streams where we've sat here and had debates on before, is outrageous. And it is quite right that this has become more of an issue as time has gone on. And I think that's a positive thing. We need to value our nature to a far higher level than we ever did before. And change is needed. And we were indeed elected on a mandate to bring about that change. And I'm really pleased climate change was mentioned in the debate as well, because the problem that we have is only going to increase because of our changing climate. We are going to see, perhaps not everywhere quite as wet as the Honourable Member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale's constituency, but certainly getting into those kind of levels. And I'd like to also pay tribute to, since I became Minister for this, all of those campaign groups, all of those organisations who've come to meet me. Incredibly passionate, dedicated people, often those climate citizen scientists going out and giving their spare time to work on this, because it's something that they passionately believe in as well. And I'd also like to mention the wonderful speech from my honourable friend, the quietly spoken radical from Easington, and welcome his support for the water special measure. Never let his quietly spoken ways underestimate the secret radicalness within him. And I hope he will contribute to the water review and the consultation, and I'd be welcome to hear his expertise on this. I'd like to also pay tribute to the fantastic new member from York Outer, who is a brilliant local champion. Really value your contribution, and I share your outrage at the levels of sewage that he sees within his constituency. And I agree with the point that he made. I thought it was very good that when we're looking at this consultation, we should look at other regulatory systems, see what works well, what lessons can be learned, so that we create a system that's really effective for the future. And I hope that's something he feeds in to the consultation as we move forward. Now, the Water Special Measures Bill has been answered a number of times, and indeed, before it comes to the House, I'd be very happy. I'm going to organise drop-in sessions for members of Parliament who are welcome to come and talk to me about potential amendments, things they'd like to see within the bill, and discuss it with me. And, of course, make time for all of the front-bench spokespeople to come and talk to me about that as well. But I have to say, Chair, I was rather surprised to hear criticism from members of Parliament of the idea of inclusion and consultation with our Commission. We believe, this government, in doing things with people and not to people. Yep. And I'll go so far as to say that this government does not believe itself to be arrogant enough to have all the answers and all the expertise, especially when there are indeed very many experts out there as well. This government wants to reset our water industry for decades to come, and it's in my DNA, and in fact, not only in my DNA, but on the back of my Labour Party membership card, that it says, by the strength of our common endeavours, we achieve more than we achieve alone. And certainly that is my philosophy when it comes to working with other people, looking at systems of co-production, looking at how we can create consensus and bring together different ideas and different expertise. So I was a bit surprised to hear the idea of consultation and including others ignored. And in fact, I think there have been many examples under the previous government where the government has been arrogant enough to presume that it knows all of the answers, has indeed created systems and policies that have been found to be utterly failing because they didn't listen to what the general public or indeed other campaigners are saying. And there's little point in different members of Parliament getting up to talk about how they value the contribution of the campaigners in their organisation and how welcome they are and how well they've worked together with them, when they're also getting up to say that those campaigners and those people who have those ideas and expertise shouldn't contribute towards government policy. Deeds, not words. If you value someone's expertise and contribution, then let them work with us to shape legislation for the future. This Commission will work with those experts, will value their contributions, will listen to them, and will shape something that is fit for the future. It will conclude in June, after a couple of months of looking at responding to that from the government. It will bring forward further legislation. Some things need primary legislation to change, as the Shadow Minister will no doubt understand. Some things can be done more quickly. I mean, that very much depends on the recommendations that are brought forward. If they require primary legislation, obviously those things take longer. But I think that it's an important point that this government wants to do things in a different and inclusive way. And I say this and I reach out to each and every one of you within this room to say, we want to do this with you. Yes, there's going to be different points of view across the room, and there's going to be different ideas about what the right answer is. But let's collectively, not just as members of Parliament across the House, but as campaign groups, as organisations, as members of the campaign groups, and all across, and indeed, Mr Chair, can I also say my mum's wild swimming group, who I'm sure have many opinions on what exactly should the right policy be, come together and create something that is really meaningful and that commands that cross-party support and commands and makes a difference. That's what we want from this consultation. And I'll be honest, a bit disappointed that people think consulting and working with other people is a bad idea. And when I'm on my slight moan about, about things that are slightly disappointing as well, there seems to be a confused message coming from this room, because we've had, as been pointed out, some of the drought plans for some of the water companies highlighted as being rather extreme, shall we say, in terms of shipping water over from other countries to deal with drought. But then we've also had, from the same side, criticisms of building reservoirs. We can't do both. If you want a plan for drought, we need to talk about building reservoirs. We need to make sure we have all of the infrastructure we need for the future. And in terms of what has the government been doing, well, I'll tell you what we were doing week one. Week one, we had all of the CEOs together in a room to talk to them about how we fix the industry. This meant, from this meeting, we secured a change to the Articles of Association. We secured funding for vital infrastructure is ring-fenced, new customer panels, strengthening protection and compensation for householders too. And then week one, after the summer recess, we introduced the Water Special Measures Bill. So in our 100 days, we've hardly been sitting on our laurels. Now, lots been said about the Independent Commission, and I think it's really important that it is independent, and I'm very pleased my honourable friend paid tribute to Sir John Cunliffe, whose expertise in financial record, I think, is second to none. So I think that's somebody that we can all work with and work collectively together to look at producing something that's really, really effective. Of course.
So just on that point, while we're on the Commission, would the Minister be just kind enough just to outline to the House the issue on timings? So we have the PR24 process, which is being looked at by Ofwat at the moment, takes effect next year, will be in place until 2029, 2030. Are any positive recommendations from this Commission going to take effect within that price review period?
Yeah, and that's a good... What the Shadow Minister is pointing out is the way that we plan and look in our 5-year cycle. And in fact, there's a whole other question as to, is that the best way that we look at doing things? And the answer is the answer I gave earlier on, which is very much things depend on whether they need primary legislation. Some things changing the regulator doesn't affect the price review framework. And he knows the price review framework is very much based around the amount of money that people are going to invest in different infrastructure and changes needed for the next 5 years. That doesn't mean that you can't change things around regulation and around the rules, which is something I'm sure he remembers and understands. So what I want to finish by is reiterating our government's commitment to driving meaningful long-term improvements in the performance and culture of the water industry. We want to deliver on our ambition to clean up our rivers, lakes and seas. And these actions outlined today are only the beginning. I am passionate about this issue. In fact, this is the issue I am pleased to become the Minister for, because it was the issue I actually asked to become the Minister for, and that doesn't always happen in politics. So I'm very pleased to be leading on this issue. I reiterate my invitation to work with each and every one of you. I think consultation and collaboration are good things, and I hope that each of you will embrace that. And I look forward to working with you all to achieve our goal that we all share, which is our cleaner rivers, lakes and seas.
Tim Farron to wind up.
Mr Pritchard, I see I've got 7 minutes. I won't use them all. I'll do my best not to use them all. First of all, can I just reiterate something I said at the very beginning of my opening remarks, and that is to genuinely pay tribute to people who work on the ground, both for water companies, United Utilities in my neck of the woods, and for Ofwat and for the EA. I think this debate can sometimes sound really quite toxic to them. They're working very hard, doing important work, and they are victims of a system. which it is vital that we change. And so I'm delighted that others have said the same thing today, and I just want to put that on the record, particularly in my local community. I want to thank colleagues from all sides for excellent contributions, people passionate about their own communities, about the waterways in their communities, about the groups, the voluntary groups working within them, helping to highlight these issues. And to thank the front benches as well, both from the Labour and the Conservative side, but especially my honourable friend, the member for Whitney, who made an absolutely fantastic contribution and whose expertise is something we very much value. The people of Whitney are lucky to have him, and we're lucky to have him also. Just a reflection on the Minister's comments, who I count as a friend and respect very much indeed. I think that what she said about collaboration is absolutely right. My concern is simply that, and it's an observation, a relatively neutral observation, that the Labour manifesto was pretty thin across the board. And I understand why. Maybe for the last 3 years they felt it was their election to lose, and therefore the more information you put out there, the more chance you had of maybe throwing it all away. I do understand the politics, but that doesn't really justify waiting several months to actually begin the process of taking action. So you can be collaborative, you can consult, and you can take radical action early on. But I do take a point, and she defended the government's position and process on this very, very well. Our view is simply that we will be and should be a constructive opposition, and we will challenge and we will seek to be constructive as we do so. But I will also say that, at least cautiously, we are encouraged by what we heard today from her right honourable friend, and indeed from herself. Since I have a minute, I'm going to ask one extra thing, because it's important that we tackle this issue from a national perspective. But there is also a local area issue from my perspective I think we could fix. So Windermere gets an awful lot of coverage, and rightly so. A fifth of the pollution in Windermere actually comes from septic tanks, including 89 packaged treatment works around about the lakes, all of which would relatively easily be connected to the mains. And I wonder whether she'd agree to meet with me, United Utilities and representatives of the tourism and hospitality industry to see whether we could make that migration up the standards and do something genuinely useful at the bottom level to improve the water quality of that. If she wants to give way and say yes, I'd be delighted.
Thank you very much. And in the spirit of sort of collaboration, of which I've just spoken so long about, of course, I'll meet with him.
Mr Chairman, she's a good one. Thank you very much indeed, and I appreciate it very much. And finally, so thanks to everybody who intervened in all this, but thank you, Chair. It might sound a bit smarmy, but you and I go back a long way. When I first started here, I wish I had a chair of Westminster Hall debates who talked us through the process as well as you have today. So I'm very grateful to you and indeed everybody else who's been here.
Well, it'll definitely be called first next time, that's for sure. You have been here a long time, you know how to work the system, so there we are. No, there is no system to work. We are neutral in the chair, but thank you for his kind comments. The question is that this House has considered the regulation and financial stability of water companies. As many of that opinion say aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is now suspended until the next debate in 3 minutes. Have a good evening. Thank you.